We're all one decision away from massively changing the direction of our lives. Billionaires, millionaires, 100,000aires, people who have $0, people who are in massive debt. The only real thing that distinguishes these people is the quality of their decisions. So I spent the better part of 2.5 years obsessing about a single decision, whether or not to sell my business. And I'm thankful to tell you that 2.5 years later, I made that decision. So what I want to walk you through is how I made it and hopefully help someone skip the 2.5 years of mental trudging that it took me to get here. So let's start with, why did I want to sell? So let me take you back into a moment that I decided to sell and then bring you forward to this moment. So Layla and I were on a walk in March of 2019, and we had just done $4.4 million in revenue that month and taken out $1.7 million in owner dividends that month. She stopped and she looked at me and she said, let's shut it down. I don't feel like doing this anymore. We don't need the money. Let's just shut it down and move on. And being the money-motivated entrepreneur that I was at the time, I was like, hey, now let's at least see if we can sell this, all right? Maybe we can get like a small payday before moving on to our next thing. And so I went up and I hit my network up and asked anyone if they knew anyone who could help me, value my business and let me know what somebody might pay for it. And that's when a good friend of mine, Rick Mayo, introduced me to an investment banking friend of his who specialized in our space, which is the fitness space at the time. And so within a day or two, I was on the phone with a guy named Mike Bakumian, and he was a banker in the fitness space and had transacted a handful of high-profile deals. And after a few introductions, I shared our dilemma and asked if there was, he thought the company could be worth anything. And what he told me next really changed my life. And so I'm loosely paraphrasing, but he said, dude, you grew from 0 to $17 million in profit in 2 years, and you're now on pace to grow 50% again this year. And I was like, yeah, I know. We're really tired of it though. And Michael was like, if you continue this growth at the end of the year, he's like, I could sell this for 150 million easily. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. And if you can disassociate your brand from your face and maybe get another acquisition channel going, probably even more. And so my jaw just about hit the floor, right? I was used to small business ownership where when you stop wanting to do business, you beg someone to buy from you and you try and recoup your costs as much as you can get. But this was something entirely different, right? 150 million. That's not even rich, that's generational wealth, right? And as a reminder, I was 28. All right. And so my wife and I probably had maybe 20 million bucks saved up at the time, but this was an order of magnitude change in wealth for us. And so after getting off the phone with Michael, my head was spinning and I felt like my world perspective had shifted forever, and it had. From that moment onwards, the next 2.5 years, all I thought about was, how do I sell this business for $150 million? And interestingly, from that moment onwards, my business plateaued, more or less, right? I mean, we grew, but not to the same degree that we were growing before. And it could have been because I was already burned out, which is possible. It could have been because of macroeconomic forces, because there was a little flu that went around that affected gyms. Or it could have been because I shifted from wanting to build something to wanting to sell it. And I have no idea. All I can say is that I stopped growing after that conversation. And so I can truthfully tell you that 50% or more of my mental bandwidth for the last 2.5 years was dedicated to the idea of selling. And what's more difficult about that is I can't really talk about it publicly, right? And so it's this kind of like this burden that you keep in the back of your head that just eats up a lot of your thoughts that you can't talk about, right? And so what happened was all my decisions changed from what is going to provide me the most long-term goodwill with our customers to what would a potential acquirer think of the decision and would it make the company more or less valuable. And I think this ultimately hurt my business. The heart behind the business had shifted from the process to the outcome. And over the next year, our revenue went up, but our profit dropped because I thought an acquirer would want to see lower churn, which is true. But I made a terrible mistake and lowered my prices in an attempt to do so, and ended up cutting about $5 million in profit in the process. So I went from 17 million in profit on 26 million top line to the next year, I think we did 37 million top line, 13.4 million bottom line, which is still obviously not a bad, outcome, but it should have gone the other way. It should have done like 19 million on 37. Like I said, although we grew by 40% top line, my bottom line shrunk by 25%. And so, we also thought we needed to show we were legit and hired a lot more people to sit around and do nothing while the core team was still hustling to get the work done. Either way, we ballooned up to like 135 employees, I think, at our peak for those two entities. And so either way, over the course of 2019, we pulled me out somewhat from the fulfillment and product divisions. So that was somewhat of a win. And then in 2020, we committed to selling the company, right? So that's kind of like speeding up to 2020. And we knew we could sell the story of the infrastructure cost being something that ate up margin and that we were still growing and we were on pace to, keep it for a year and show some growth and then sell it concept. So we went to market in February of 2020. And right, as you guessed it, there was this flu that went around, kind of affected our business a little bit. And we had the option of pulling back, but Layla and I were honestly, just like even-handed about being the gym business, right? We wanted to not have that be the only thing in our lives. The bankers ended up adjusting our expectations and said, I think, and mind you, this was actually, we were no longer working with the guy that was referenced earlier. He actually was just counsel. We ended up using a different firm. I think we can definitely help you grow and get 45 for this business, right? And at this this point, we were fine with that. We just wanted out, and not really out, just more like we wanted our focus back. And so over the next 3 quarters, our revenue and profit continued to decline as the flu raged on. And once the second shutdown hit, the business really hit rock bottom in Q4. So we had gone from like $3 to $4 million a quarter in profit to like 500 grand in profit in Q4 of 2020, right? And so the bankers suggested that we stop the sales process and try again once the flu had gone away, right? But Layla and I were kind of yet again really determined to be out of pain, and so we told them to just keep going with the process. And so they hit up all the private equity firms again, and lo and behold, we got a few replies, and some firms were interested in buying our company at rock bottom. What a surprise, right? And those replies, after a lot of phone calls and meet and greets and information requests, turned out to be 2 offers for the company. And then, for context, I can't share the actual numbers of the trailing 12 that they came up to this for 2021, but I can tell you that they just consistently straight line went up. So basically Q4, Q1 was kind of like the bottom of it. Like December of Q4 of 2020 was like the absolute bottom. And that's really because there was almost no hope. You know what I mean? Like it had the second round of shutdowns, a lot of gyms had shut down. It was just kind of looking bleak, no end in sight, etc. And so I'll bring you up to speed kind of internally. We realized that we would have to build this business to run on its own because we didn't know if we were going to be able to sell it. And we knew we weren't going to like want to shut it down or something like that. There's too many families that relied on us, too many employees, too many customers. Like it didn't make sense. And so beyond that, tactically, we started an outbound call center so that we could have a second channel. So we started to take the steps that we knew we should do. And from the feedback that we'd had from the first round, which was like, you need a second channel, it needs to be less branded to you, etc. This is important to understand. Over the next 12 months, I stopped attending all product meetings, all client-facing calls, all client-facing events. So I didn't show up to my events, like there's nothing. We built an outbound call team that did 50% of our sales volume, and we promoted a team of gym owners to become the face of the consulting brand overall. And so all that remained for me was a weekly one-on-one with the CEO, a weekly executive call team that was 90 minutes, and quarterly meetups internally. So I was no longer public-facing at all. It was only internal that I was kind of facing. And so now let's get back to where it was interesting. So we signed and accepted an LOI. And at this point, the profits had gone up significantly from kind of the Q4 bottom. And I have to skip the actual numbers of what was around there. I can just tell you the overarching number, which ended up being 46.2. And so here was the decision-making process, and that's what I want to get into, which is like, okay, so what did you guys end up doing and why? All right, because during this process, the business kind of almost shot out of a gun. 2021, it kind of had a really strong rebound. That's obviously why there was way more people who were interested. First, there was 2, and then there was 2 more interested parties. And so we had a handful of private equity firms that saw that, okay, they saw the bottom, they saw the fast rising back, and they're like, wait, we could buy a company that just did, 15 million in EBITDA a year ago or 2 years ago, and they can bank on the fact that it'll probably do that again. Let's dive in. All right, so that's the backstory. So these are the considerations, the stories/milestones that I was telling myself: the money, energy, headspace, team resources, future vision, best decisions for the business, and ultimately why I decided what I decided to do. I wish I could have given you more visuals for this, but this already took me a lot of time to transcribe all my notes into one presentation. And so there was 2 kind of components to this, and it was really kind of having this like devil's advocate in my head conversation that was going back and forth. And I even just put these directional arrows to like what I said first and then what I responded with mentally. I'm sharing these thoughts with you because I want to show that like I don't think these thoughts ever go away. You know what I mean? Like I said, and this is like, not legit because they didn't exit their businesses. I was like, that is also a good point. I was like, well, there's kind of like the 4-minute mile component. Like there's no e-learning companies that really sell for, or personality driven brands that are selling for these types of numbers, not many at least. And so I could prove that, these types of models are sellable. I was like, well, can I just prove that I have a higher net worth and keep it? I was like, that's also not a good idea or not a good reason to sell it. Another story was like, you can't have more than one thing. And so that's why you should sell. But, in terms of keeping it, it's like, well, you just need to level up your skill set. Like it is not physically impossible. There are other entrepreneurs who do this. And so you just need to be better. And this is just a great growth opportunity. So that's not a good reason to sell. I'm like, all right, fair. I was like, it's a big, nice F you to everybody who doubted and, spoke out against me over the years. And then it's just like, you're better than that. That's also not a good reason to sell. So I'm sharing this stuff very candidly. You can reinforce the lesson of selling my gyms. And so the big lesson there, and this is one that I've spoken about a lot, is that, sometimes you have to give up what you have in order to give up to get the bigger thing that is unknown. So you have to let go of something that you do know that is good in front of you for something that you don't know that could potentially be great. And it kind of hinges on the idea that what we don't do are the things that we regret rather than the things that we do and then fail at. That's kind of the story there. And the keeping argument of that is like, well, that might be the wrong lesson to learn. Like maybe you needed to exit those things, but it doesn't mean you need to exit everything. It's making sure that we apply the correct lesson to the story, and that might not be the right lesson from that story. I was like, okay, that's fair. And then, finally doing a sale, or at least selling the majority portion of the business, would unbrand me somewhat from the fitness industry because it's still something that drives me a little nuts. It might also be because of how I look, so that's possible. Just being real. Like I still see comments that are like, hey man, I still find your content valuable even though I'm not a gym owner. And I'm like, I haven't made a gym piece of content in 3 years. I'm glad. Like it's just funny. And I consciously made that decision in 2019 when I rebranded my podcast from Gym Launch Secrets. And I hadn't spoken about gym stuff in a while, but I consciously rebranded it to The Game, which you can check out if you want. And so my keeping story around that is like, people have already moved on from that dude. Like a handful of comments is not like what everyone thinks about you, right? You're not just like some gym dude. You already have the majority of your money is made outside of gyms now. I was like, oh yeah, but people don't know that. And so anyways, these are the stories I was telling myself at this time, right? And so next is kind of like, what are the money things that I was telling? I was like, okay, well, selling cash would be nice. But the keeping argument is, well, after you'll have a tax event, so you'll have to give a portion of that to the government. It'll actually net decrease your net worth because you already have that value in equity. And because of the amount of money you already have, so my wife and I at this point have probably taken from those two businesses about 45-ish million in dividends. It's not really going to materially change your living, which is true. Other thing though is that from a selling perspective, it's like I can take that cash and then I can reinvest it, and then all I have to do is just make the delta, right? So it's like I can take whatever cash I would receive there, I can invest it, and then I can build something else. And what I'd have to do is make up the net difference between what I do on my own, what my cash grows into, versus what that 66% would be worth in 5 years, right? And so that's the net delta difference. And I was like, I feel like that would be still a pretty strong argument for doing the sale. The flip side is, what am I going to buy that's going to make me the same amount of money that I could from this company that's clearly going to triple and then triple in value and go back to what it was worth pre-flu? Fair argument. On the other side, it's like, well, you're super concentrated. Diversification is not a bad idea. And then I quoted Warren, is a hedge against ignorance. Do you feel ignorant in this space? Do you feel like you don't like that the companies that you have you don't know anything about? Well, no, I actually feel like I know more about the stuff that I'm doing. Okay, well then you don't need to have diversification. Just go all in on the things that you know, and then they will grow disproportionately, which candidly, my life is an example of that. So it's hard to argue against that point. Rich people sell, wealthy people never sell. Another argument for keeping it. Yeah, I could also take out debt and still continue to own the whole thing, kind of refinance the business and still keep 100% ownership if I did that. But the problem for me from that perspective is I knew that I would never do that because I was already very tired at that point, and running an entire another process from scratch was something that I just knew I wasn't going to be willing to do, at least on any short time horizon. I was like, okay, well, you can still do debt to fuel like M&A and start doing acquisitions and just use that as the umbrella brand. And I was like, well, a couple of things. One, I didn't have the debt relationships. Two, I didn't know M&A at that level. Buying majority of 30, 40 million, 10 on the low side, 30, 40 on the high side size companies. I was like, those are mistakes that could potentially like undo everything I've done. And I'm just not willing to quote a friend of mine, bet the empire for a pot of gold. That was kind of the argument against just using debt to fuel M&A. The final, keeping argument for money was like, after tax, you're almost going to end up the same money as if you just take out debt on the company tax-free. And that is true in theory, but it's unknown based on promises from bankers. That's not 100% because a lot of times they may inflate things. Just FYI, side note, bankers will inflate things for you because they want you to sign on the dotted line to work with them. Big picture consolidated from this is that like the money wasn't going to change my life in either direction, whether I sold or I kept it. Which brought me to the next one, which is energy and headspace. On one level, it's like the story is you can't have more than one thing, which I'm a very big proponent of. The counter to that is, well, the richest people own lots of things. Okay, well, that's also true too. But I think the main difference, and I'll hit on this later, is that I think you can only have one active thing. The split attention is one of the most dangerous things in entrepreneurship. And I can tell you that when I did split my attention, when I started another company, and then a third company, my revenue pretty much just continued to flatline. So doing more things just does not, like, you have to focus. And I think that you can have lots of things that are going on, but you can only have one active thing. So like if I own a building, I'm not active in that. I could invest in Apple and I'm not active in that. And so you can own lots of things. It's just to make sure that what you're owning is not owning you. The next point here is that selling is a story, it's not reality. So it's like the idea that I'm just gonna like walk away magically and not care about the company or the employees or the customers. It's just, that's a story I'm telling myself in my head. There's still 100% going to be things that I'm sleeping and, going to bed and thinking about the team and the company and all that stuff. And so it's like, you're not going to get what you think you're going to get from selling. I was like, yeah, but I could treat it like other portfolio companies because it's kind of redistributing my net worth, accordingly across more enterprises, and then I can care about them more evenly. Whereas here it's disproportionate in terms of like lopsided for my net worth. So I was like, okay, that's fair. Another strong argument for keeping is like, you'll grow faster, never selling, just never sell and let it compound tax free. The counter, for that is like, I just have to outpace that delta, what the cash can make me from investing plus what I'm going to make on my own versus what that 2/3 share would grow into, right? That's what I have to make up. If I can make that up, then it would make sense. And then this one was actually from my closest friend. He said, what's the objective? What problem are you solving? He said, I feel like you just chose the nuclear option of like, okay, I want to get Headspace back. And so therefore I must, sell 2/3, sell a majority of my company. He said, why don't you just match the conditions, right? Like what do you imagine life to be like when you have sold majority? And then look at what those conditions look like and then match them in your current condition. And then you can keep the company and still have the effective sale that happens in your mind. And I was like, that is a fair point. But, my counter was that like, I don't think I can do that. I feel like I would imagine it's like having kids where even if you're spending zero time, taking care of the kids, even when they go to college, you're still thinking about them, right? They're still taking up shower time. They're still taking up walk time. They're still taking up morning coffee, chat time, right? And so those are kind of some of the headspace considerations I had. Team and resources. The big line here is that, when you sell a company, you lose the resources, right? And I'm so used to being on top and having a lot of leverage in my decisions. It's way more just deciding at this point. Like I'm not doing a ton of doing within any of the portfolio companies. And so giving up that kind of all those resources, like, hey, if I'm like, hey, I want to go recruit somebody, I just go to the recruiter and say, hey, can you recruit this person, right? If I want to like go build a site or I want to go put a book on Amazon, I just say, hey, can you go put this book on Amazon? And then it just gets done, right? So I would lose that. And that might actually be a big asset for what I wanted to do next and actually allow me to move faster, right? So that is a strong argument for keeping it, right? So these are the 4 thoughts that I had written down during the process. It was like, okay, well, I could lose the team and but like I could coach them to become like the type of people that could work, at acquisition.com. It's like, well, different needs require a different team. That's not a really good shortcut. Like there's different skills, different backgrounds, different experiences, etc. That's not really good to try and retrofit a team that was not designed for this, right? Obviously I love the team. They've been with you since the beginning. This is me arguing to myself. Yeah, but I need to give them room to grow. And if I'm still there, kind of on top of it, they're not going to be able to like blossom into what I think they can really truly grow into. You can make your employees wealthier. If you kept it, you could, do some sort of ESOP program there, which is an employee stock ownership program. I was like, yeah, but they can also become wealthy through the stock ownership plan that the new, owners would put in. It's like, okay, that's kind of moot. Richest guys all said that they regret selling their teams. That's something I talked to people who are wealthier than me, and they're like, they all regretted doing it. The counter to that is, but they're all really wealthy doing their next thing. So, I can understand both sides of it. Future and vision, in terms of like, what do I want my life to be like? This could be the cash cow to build the conglomerate, that funds all of these new acquisitions that I build into my conglomeration. I was like, yeah, but I could use the cash from the sale to do the same. Okay, fair. The version of me that I want to be can own multiple companies without running them. Yes, but you still need to give, like that's not reality for you right now. And then, finally here, you'll still care about the team the same or still care about the company the same, but you'll just have given up the upside. It's like, so you're still going to do the same mental work and mental decisions and strategic planning the way you always are, but you'll just give up the upside. And the counter to that is like, yeah, but I'll still have 4 companies rather than 1, and that's going to really distract me from what I want to do ultimately, which is acquisition.com. And so that was kind of like the future and vision component of it. All right. And so the last thing before I'll tell you why I made the decision that I did is the business component. On one side, I was like, okay, do you want to do what is required to get to 200 million? I could just do the playbook that the private equity was going to do because I know what their playbook is. And so I could just do that. So that's an argument, right? Businesses always go up in value over time. right? Unless they don't, in which case they become unsellable. So it's like, if you keep it and it goes up, then like you would still own the thing and it would be making more money in the future. So the value goes up and you get dividends the whole time, which is why business ownership is very lucrative. But in case it doesn't, in which case you don't make any money and the thing that you have has no value, right? You know, they don't have a magic pill. They're not going to do anything you don't know how to do. It's like, yes, but they're going to put all their focus on it. And I am not, because I'm doing other things that I want to do. You know, imagine what you're going to learn watching them do M&A if we sell it. Yeah, but you don't need to learn from them to do that. So that's a different, perspective on it. If you want to do what they do, just buy it from yourself, and have your new self buy it from your old self, still go through the transaction mentally, install the same incentives, run the same playbook as them, but just own the whole thing, right? But I really thought about that, and I was like, I feel like it's fear that's driving that decision, fear of losing what I have. And it's like, hey, you need to have the skill of being passive. Well, I already have that. It's just not, I just don't feel like I have that about a company that I founded myself. And then you can always just use the transition plan that I already designed during diligence that I presented to them and just execute it yourself. And it's like, yeah, I can do that in theory, but I don't know if it's going to be that clean. And so, the one line summary for this is like, do I think selling or keeping it is the best decision for the business? I think that if I keep the company, I will increase my net worth more. Do I think the company will realize its potential if I keep it? Maybe, maybe not. I think that the people who are going to potentially buy it have very good skill set in growing companies of this size. They're more experienced in M&A than me. And so I think that the business would benefit from that. All right, so what decision did I ultimately make? I'll give you my quick one-line summary of kind of selling and keeping after giving you all those different variables. For selling, anything that distracts from my Berkshire Hathaway will be a net loss. So get into a better boat. And this is just the classic example of like, everybody told me that I was crazy when I sold my gyms to start the licensing company, Gym Launch. But it was because like what they saw in front of them was 6 gyms that were making money, and I was 26 or something. And they were, like, why would you give something up that you worked so hard for? And it's obviously making money. And it's because like, in some ways, like, I have to believe in me more than they do, because in their minds, maybe that's what they think I'm limited to capacity wise. And I think that I can do more. And so that's the argument for selling. The argument for keeping, which is also very compelling, is, become the person who can grow a cash compounding conglomerate without ever selling, ever. Warren Buffett never sells wholly owned companies. He also says, get into the best boat. So he has 2 pieces of advice that contradict themselves, and they're both very good and very, very fair. So what decision did I ultimately make, right? So everyone has a plan until there's a check in front of them to walk away for 46.2. So it's one thing to say no in theory, and it's another thing to say no when you're one email away from that, money, right? And so these are kind of the soft decision frameworks that I applied. So the first one is that I had to acknowledge that there was no wrong answer, right? So I knew that if I did either of those directions, ultimately I was still always going to be very wealthy, and none of it was going to make any material difference in my life. And whatever decision I tried to go to, winners win, and I would have probably executed on either way, and it probably wouldn't matter. I knew also from a happiness perspective that I'll probably be happy in either direction, and, rationalize whatever decision I made either way. That was like, first and foremost, none of this matters. The second one is like, okay, well, is it, I could still make a better decision versus a worse decision, even though they both might be, quote, a right decision. Which has just reminded me of the story of the boy and the horse. Father buys a boy a horse. Everyone in the town says that's amazing. The wise man says time will tell. Then the kid falls off the horse and breaks his leg, and then everyone's like, oh, that's terrible, you bought the kid the horse. And then the wise man says time will tell. And then army comes around and recruits all the young guys to go to the military, and then half of them die, and then everyone's like, oh my god, that horse was a blessing. And then the wise man says time will tell. And so ultimately you kind of get where this is going, right? Is that you don't really know whether something was good or bad until the day you die, and once you die, it won't matter. Food for thought. Noting that the 3 hardest decisions in my life, quitting my job to start my gym, selling the gyms to start Gym Launch, and then potentially selling Gym Launch Prestige and Allen to start acquisition.com and go all in on that. Each of those were the 3 hardest decisions in my life, and it's because I had to give up something that I knew, that gave me status, that people give me praise for, that most people considered big material successes, for something that was potentially bigger but completely unknown. So the bird in the hand versus the 2 in the bush. And the thing is that the hardest decisions I think in life are giving up the one that's in your hand for the 2 that are in the bush. And so it's like, you have to take big risks sometimes to take the next kind of like quantum leap, take the next jump in order of magnitude. So these are the 3 hardest decisions I've ever made in my life. And I would say that in order, they were most difficult, quitting my job, second most difficult, selling my gyms, third most difficult, selling these companies, or my majority interest in those companies. So I give this for context, because I think that a lot of people who are listening to this, like, you're probably in one of these decisions where you have one in your hand and there's 2 in the bush. Like, I think the hardest decision of entrepreneurship, or really life in general, is when do you give that up? When do you not take the rational move and take the upside one? And so for me, I just knew that regret would be more guaranteed from paths not taken rather than failed execution. This is a question that I get from Layla, and it was one of the things that we both thought about a lot, which is, what am I most afraid of? Like, which of these decisions makes me the most afraid, keeping it or selling it? And for me, selling it was the thing I was most afraid of, because I was like, what if I can't recreate what I've done? What if it's, what it's a flash in the pan? What if I'm a one-hit wonder, which was silly anyways, because we already have 7 other businesses we've sold. But I'm just telling you, these are the thoughts you have, right? And so, yeah, like, what am I most afraid of? That was what I was most afraid of. And so finally, our second to last, I had my 85-year-old self-test, which I've talked a lot about, and I'll talk more about, which is I run, and I'm doing this almost like without knowing now, because it's been so ingrained, because it's been probably the most effective decision framework I've had in my life. And so I'm just going to keep using it, which is like, what does 85-year-old me think about this decision? And the honest truth is that 85-year-old me in this decision was useless, because he was like, it's not going to matter anyways. Do the thing that excites you. And, it's like, what are you, and like, I'm talking to my 85-year-old self, and he's like, what are you afraid of? And it's like, that I'm not going to be successful if I do the next thing. He's like, well, that's not a very good reason not to do it. And so I was like, okay, I guess that's fair. Does who you want to become, I was like, well, I really want to be a rational investor. I want to be somebody who makes rational decisions. He's like, yeah, but, you're limited on your upside in this. And so, like, if you believe that your life can be bigger than this, then you're guaranteed to not get it if you don't take the big jumps. I was like, okay, that's fair. And so that was kind of like the main shifts that I got from my 85-year-old self. This was ultimately the one thing that mattered most. And then I'll tell you finally why I decided to do what I did. The next thing that I do will be 10x or 100 times as big. And if anything takes my attention from that, it will be a net loss. I would hate to look back and think I was holding on too hard to what I had and didn't have enough faith for what I could have if I took the leap and believed before seeing. And so at every level, the fall gets bigger, but so too is the reward. And so, like, as you climb the mountain, right? If you fall, there's further to hit the ground in terms of your perceived failures. But like, you still have to take jumps to hit the next mountaintops. And so I think that was ultimately the biggest reason for why we decided to do what we did. And I'll tell you one interesting thing, which is that, like, I felt the loss of the business, but I didn't feel the gain of the money. The money, really, I didn't feel it at all. And so that was kind of interesting. So I felt like the loss of resources. I did feel some level of relief for about 3 days, and then it was back to normal, which was nice. And then now that we are back in this season of building, I can tell you 100% that this was 100% the right decision. Obviously I'm going to rationalize whatever decision I make, but after really thinking through all of the different angles, this was